The store was loud that afternoon. Carts rolling, music humming, people arguing over prices. Nobody noticed the old woman in the gray coat walking slowly down the frozen food aisle. Her name was Elizabeth. She had kind eyes, soft wrinkles, and a quiet smile that made people feel safe. But something about her that day felt different. When the store manager, Josh, shouted at her and then slapped her, everyone froze. 2 minutes later, the quiet old woman did something no one saw coming. Stay around until the very end, because you're going to see how she sacked the team. It all started on a windy Friday. The grocery store was full of tired shoppers rushing before the storm hit. The wind outside made the big glass doors rattle each time someone entered. Elizabeth, a 74-year-old retired U.S. Marshal, walked in slowly, her cane tapping on the floor. She was small and moved carefully, but there was a calm strength in her that most people missed. She came to buy a few things: milk, tea, and bread. That's all. Her pension check had just cleared, and she wanted to make soup for the kids at the shelter nearby. It was something she did every week. But that day, the self-checkout machines were down and the lines were long. People grumbled, phones buzzed, kids cried. The store manager, Josh, a tall man in his 30s, was barking orders at everyone. He was having a bad day, one of those days when everything felt wrong. "Can we open another register?" someone shouted. "Tell him to wait," Josh snapped, not even looking up. Elizabeth waited patiently in line for nearly 15 minutes. When she finally got to the front, the young cashier told her the price of her tea box was higher than what the shelf tag said. "I think there's a mistake, dear," Elizabeth said softly. "It was marked $2.99. The cashier looked helpless. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's ringing up $5.49. Elizabeth smiled. "That can't be right. Could you check, please?" Before the girl could move, Josh appeared. "What's the problem here?" The cashier explained quietly, but Josh didn't let her finish. He turned to Elizabeth, irritated. "The price is what the system says, ma'am." Elizabeth still spoke calmly. "I understand, but maybe you could send someone to confirm the tag. I saw it myself." Josh sighed loudly. "Look, lady, we don't have time for this. If you can't afford it, just leave it." The line went silent. A man coughed awkwardly. The cashier's eyes widened. Elizabeth's face didn't change. "Young man," she said softly, "watch your tone. I'm asking for respect, not charity." Josh smirked. "Respect goes both ways, lady. I don't owe you anything." The words hung heavy in the air. Elizabeth's hand trembled slightly as she placed her tea back on the counter. "That's enough," she whispered. But Josh stepped closer. "You can't tell me what's enough. You don't run this place. I do." Someone in line muttered, "Man, chill out." Josh's face reddened. He turned sharply, waving his hand. "Stay out of this." Then, in a burst of frustration, he pointed at Elizabeth. "And you, stop wasting everyone's time." When she tried to lift her groceries to leave, his hand came down fast. A hard slap, sharp, loud, shocking. Her glasses fell to the floor. The sound cracked through the whole store. For 2 seconds, everything was frozen. Nobody moved. Even the beeping of the scanners seemed to stop. Elizabeth didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stood there, blinking. Then, slowly, she picked up her glasses and put them back on. "Josh," she said quietly, almost gently, "you just made a very big mistake." He laughed nervously, realizing what he'd done. Lady, it was an accident. You stepped forward. But before he could finish, Elizabeth reached into her bag and pulled out a small black leather folder. Inside was an old badge, worn but still shining, with her name engraved in gold. Marshal Elizabeth Green, U.S. Department of Justice, retired. Gasps rippled through the line. The cashier covered her mouth. Josh's eyes widened. What is this? Some kind of joke? Elizabeth's voice was steady. No joke. You just assaulted a retired federal officer in front of witnesses and a security camera. She turned to the cashier. Sweetheart, can you please call your regional office? Use the emergency line. The young woman fumbled for the phone, shaking. Josh started to panic. Wait, no, hold on, I didn't... But it was too late. The assistant manager came running over, confused, followed by the security guard. People in line started recording with their phones. Elizabeth stood calm and still, her cane in one hand, her badge in the other. Son, she said to Josh, you don't know who you're talking to. I've handled men twice your size and half your temper. You think power means shouting. It doesn't. Power is how you treat people who can't fight back. Josh looked pale. Please, let me explain, she said quietly. Save it. 10 minutes later, the district supervisor arrived after a frantic call. He was sweating, confused, and apologetic. Customers were whispering, taking videos, waiting to see what would happen next. Elizabeth didn't raise her voice once. She explained everything, clearly, calmly, with the quiet authority of someone who had seen worse and handled better. By the time the police showed up, Josh was shaking. He tried to deny it, but the cameras had caught everything. His words, his slap, the look on her face. When the officers asked if she wanted to press charges, she said softly, "No, I want something better." The supervisor looked at her, confused. "Better? What do you mean, ma'am?" Elizabeth looked around at the workers, the scared cashier, the silent employees, the people who looked too afraid to speak up. You've got a whole management team that allows this. They stand around and let it happen. You want to fix the problem? Start there. She turned to the supervisor, her eyes sharp but kind. If I were you, I'd clean house right now. And that's when everything shifted. The store grew quiet again. Nobody could tell if she meant it as a warning or an order. But when you spent your life commanding federal teams, your voice carries a kind of gravity that people feel in their bones. The supervisor swallowed hard, looked at Josh, then back at her. What exactly are you asking me to do?" Elizabeth just smiled faintly. "I'm not asking."
The air inside the store felt heavy now, like everyone was holding their breath. Josh stood still, his eyes darting between Elizabeth and the supervisor, sweat dripping down the side of his face. He looked like a man realizing too late that the hole he dug was far deeper than he thought. "Ma'am," the supervisor said, his voice uncertain, "maybe we should handle this privately." Elizabeth shook her head. "No, sir. Privately is how things like this get buried. Let's handle it right here, where everyone can see what respect looks like." A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. Phones were still out, recording. Some customers whispered to each other. Others simply watched, wide-eyed. The cashier, a young girl named Mia, looked on with trembling hands and tears in her eyes. She'd seen too many bad days under Josh's rule. Elizabeth took a slow breath, leaning lightly on her cane. "Tell me, son," she said to the supervisor, "do you have any idea how long this behavior's been going on here?" He hesitated. I don't know, ma'am." Josh has been manager for about 3 years. We've had some complaints, but, she cut in softly. You ignored them? He lowered his eyes. They were minor. We handled them. Elizabeth's eyebrows lifted. Handled them or hid them? No one spoke. Then with that same calm voice that used to make rookie marshals straighten up and listen, she said, "This isn't about me anymore. It's about every person who's worked here and been mistreated, disrespected, or silenced. Today, that ends." Josh tried to jump in. "This is ridiculous. You don't run this place." Elizabeth turned sharply, and her voice cut through the air like a quiet thunder. "You're right. I don't run this place. But I don't have to, because what's about to happen doesn't need my title, just truth." She turned to the customers. "You all saw what happened here. You heard his words. You saw his hand. What do you think should happen?" A woman from the back called out, "Fire him!" A man near the aisle added, "He's done this before. I saw him yell at an old vet last month." Another voice said, "He called one of the workers useless last week. I almost reported it." Elizabeth nodded slowly. "There it is," she said. "Truth has a way of speaking up when someone gives it room." Josh's shoulders sagged. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The arrogance that had filled him minutes ago had drained away. The supervisor's phone buzzed in his pocket. He answered it nervously, muttering into the receiver. Then his eyes widened and he looked straight at Josh. "Head office just saw the footage," he whispered. Josh went pale. Elizabeth folded her hands over her cane, quiet again. She didn't need to say another word. The store was silent except for the faint hum of the coolers. Finally, the supervisor spoke, his voice shaky. "Josh, you're suspended effective immediately." Josh's jaw dropped. "What? You can't." "I can," he said, glancing at Elizabeth, "and I will." Elizabeth gave a small nod. "Good start," she said softly. "Now, what about the others?" The supervisor blinked. "Others?" She looked around, her eyes sharp and scanning. The ones who watched him treat people like this for years, who looked away when it wasn't their problem, who kept silent because they were scared to lose a job, but never realized that silence feeds cruelty. The assistant manager, the floor supervisor, and the security guard exchanged nervous glances. Elizabeth continued, "You think I came here today by accident? I've been hearing stories about this store for months, from that shelter across the street, about employees crying in break rooms, about Josh threatening to cut hours if they spoke up, about customers walking out because no one cared enough to help them. I didn't come to buy tea. I came to see for myself." Gasps, murmurs. People started whispering again, this time with something like awe. The supervisor swallowed hard. "Ma'am, are you saying?" "I'm saying," Elizabeth said, "that you've got a rotten system hiding under a clean floor. And if you want this store to survive, you need to rebuild it from the ground up, right now." Josh's face twisted with anger and fear. "You can't just come in here and fire people." Elizabeth smiled faintly. "I'm not firing anyone. I'm just shining a light. What happens under that light, that's up to them." The district supervisor looked around the room. Every employee's eyes were on him now, hopeful, fearful, waiting. He took a deep breath. "All right, everyone in management, step outside, now." The assistant manager hesitated. "Sir?" "You heard me. We're clearing house. I'll be contacting corporate, and we'll bring in a temporary leadership team." It was chaos for a moment. Josh tried to argue, the assistant manager started crying, and the security guard just stood there frozen, staring at Elizabeth like she was something out of a storybook. Elizabeth didn't move. She just stood quietly, her cane steady, her expression calm but sad. When the noise died down, she looked at the cashier, young Mia, and said gently, "You okay, sweetheart?" Mia nodded, wiping her tears. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Elizabeth reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope. "You tell that shelter across the street this'll cover your soup for the next month," she said with a small smile. "And if anyone ever treats you like you don't matter again, you remember what happened here today." Mia nodded again, her chin trembling.
I will, ma'am. Elizabeth turned to the crowd. Kindness isn't weakness. It's strength with manners. And respect, it's the cheapest thing you can give someone, but it's worth more than any paycheck. She started walking toward the door. Her cane tapped softly against the tile. But just before she reached the exit, she stopped and looked back. Josh was still there, head bowed, staring at the floor. Son, she said quietly, I hope you learned from this. Not because you got caught, but because you finally saw what it feels like when power meets truth. He didn't answer, just stood there, frozen in shame. Outside, the wind had calmed. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon had shifted, and a small ray of sunlight broke through the clouds, shining on the parking lot. Elizabeth walked slowly out, her gray coat fluttering behind her. A few customers followed, calling out to thank her. One woman even tried to hug her, but she just smiled and shook her head. Don't thank me, she said softly. Thank the part of you that still believes people can do better. Then she stepped into her car, an old navy blue sedan that had seen better days, and drove off down the quiet street. Inside the store, the district supervisor stood in silence for a long moment. Then he said to Mia, We'll be needing a new manager, someone who knows what respect looks like. Mia blinked, surprised. Me? He smiled faintly. You've earned the chance. She covered her mouth, gasping softly, But I'm just... Elizabeth's voice echoed in her memory. You remember what happened here today. And she stood a little taller. Okay, she said. I'll do it.
The next morning, the news spread like wildfire. Store manager fired after slapping elderly woman. Retired U.S. Marshal exposes corrupt team. Videos of the incident had gone viral overnight. People everywhere were talking about the woman with the cane. Some called her a hero. Others called her Grandma Justice. But Elizabeth didn't want fame. She wasn't proud. She wasn't angry. She was just quiet. Sitting on her porch, sipping tea, she watched the sun rise touch the leaves of the old oak in her yard. Then a car pulled up. It was Mia, now wearing a neat store badge that read, Acting Store Manager. She walked up nervously, holding a brown paper bag. I brought you something, she said shyly. Elizabeth smiled. Is that soup I smell? Mia grinned. Your favorite, tomato and basil. The shelter kids made it. They said to tell you thank you. Elizabeth chuckled softly. Tell them I just gave them a story to believe in. For a moment, they sat in silence. The wind was calm again. Birds chirped. It felt peaceful, too peaceful for what had happened just a day ago. Then Mia asked her, Can I ask you something, ma'am? Why did you come to that store? Really? Elizabeth stared at her tea, then out toward the quiet street. Her eyes softened. Because my sister used to work there. She passed away last year. She used to tell me about that place, how mean they were to her. I promised her I'd stop by one day, just to see if things had changed. Mia's eyes widened. Your sister worked there? Elizabeth nodded. She was one of the cashiers. She said Josh always yelled at her. She was too afraid to tell corporate, said she didn't want trouble. So I waited. I waited until I couldn't anymore. Tears welled in Mia's eyes. I'm so sorry. Elizabeth smiled gently. Don't be, sweetheart. Yesterday wasn't about revenge. It was about keeping a promise. They sat quietly for a moment. Then Mia said, Everyone's talking about you. Corporate said they're renaming the store's community program after you. Elizabeth laughed softly. Oh, no, they shouldn't do that. Let them name it after kindness instead. Mia grinned. That sounds like something you'd say. Elizabeth looked at her, eyes kind and proud. Promise me something, Mia. When you wear that badge, don't forget, it's not power. It's responsibility. Treat people right, even when nobody's watching. Mia nodded. I promise. Elizabeth smiled, leaning back in her chair. Good. That's how change really begins. As Mia stood to leave, the sun broke through the clouds, warm and golden. Take care, Miss Elizabeth, Mia said softly. You too, dear, Elizabeth replied. The young woman walked down the path, holding the empty soup bowl close to her chest. Behind her, Elizabeth closed her eyes, the sunlight dancing on her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt her sister's presence, quiet, proud, and at peace. And somewhere deep inside, Elizabeth knew justice had finally come full circle. Do well to comment what you learned, share, and subscribe.